Welcome to Giant Steps, everyone. I'm your host, Doug Van Dorn, and with me is Rudy Landa, the producer and co-host and all-around great guy.
And your humble servant.
And your humble servant. So this is the podcast where we talk about giants, and we talk about giant people, and we talk about giant ideas, and we talk about giant
topics.
We want to. Giant topics. And we take steps and leaps forward.
That's right.
In our thinking, in our imagination, the way we look at the world. And so, tonight, Rudy, I wanted to talk about something that I think a lot of people are very interested in. And it's this topic of the supernatural. And, this is something that for whatever reason I've kind of become a little bit known for. And that's really due to me coming across a friend who passed away back in January, Dr. Michael Heiser. I wrote the companion book to his Unseen Realm. And so I got to know him, and we did a podcast together. And
I did not know that.
You did not know that?
I did not know that.
Yeah, I did the companion to it. You want to hear that story?
Absolutely. You're like an onion, man. It's like
layer after layer, man.
No, seriously, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I didn't know him from Adam. And so, I'm sitting here trying to figure out all this stuff that he's teaching. And I didn't know anybody. So all I could do is really write. And so that's how the giant book came about. But then I put together a catechism on the supernatural, because I'm like, I guarantee nobody's ever done this. Plenty of normal catechisms on basic theology, but on the supernatural, I don't think so. And then one day it just kind of hit me as I was passing it out to folks in the church, and they said they liked it. I was like, I wonder if I wrote to Dr. Heiser, if he might actually write me back. And I was just thinking I would self-publish it and then see if he might do a blurb. But he wrote back within 30 minutes, and he said, he's like, man, I totally want to publish this. And I was blown away. That's what he said.
What year was this? How long ago?
Oh man, I suppose this is 2015 or something like that.
It's been a little bit.
Yeah, that has been. So I actually had 130 or 40 questions in it. And he actually wrote me back about an hour later, and he goes, I can't publish this. And I knew why. It's because the ending of my catechism was all this eschatology stuff.
Yeah.
And it wasn't really that he disagreed with it, but it was that it didn't have anything to do with his book. So I wrote him back and I said, hey man, I gave it to you to do anything that you want to with this thing.
Yeah.
So if you want to mess it up, do whatever you want to. If there's something you think you can use, go ahead and do it.
Yeah.
So it was pretty funny. He knew that I'm a Reformed guy and I like the Reformation. So he cut it down to 95 questions, 95 pieces. And so it ended up, they ended up publishing it through Faith Life and the Logos publisher, Logos software publisher.
It's a good thing you didn't find it nailed to your door or something.
That would have been bad, man. Know what I would have done. So anyway, this is something I've taught for a long time, and it's something I think a lot of people have a hard time getting their mind wrapped around. And because Mike's gone, it's kind of, the baton has been passed, and those of us who were discipled by him, we really need to pick up the slack and help people try and understand what he was doing with this worldview. So he actually called this thing a lot of things, but one of them that really stuck in my head when I was reading his book the first time before it was published, and he was giving it out for free on his website to all his groupies that would listen to him on Coast to Coast. He called it the Deuteronomy 32 worldview. And I think when I first met you, we kind of talked about that a little bit. And this is kind of the whole step from the giants really into the watchers. Yeah. And the watchers, and for me, it's into Christ himself. So, it is a fun topic, but it's also something that's super relevant. And the way I like to talk about it to people is that there's kind of 3 stages to this thing, to help them get their mind wrapped around it. And I have 3 or 4 Bible texts that we'll look at for each one of those. No, I suppose we can maybe put those up on the screen later when people are watching it. Yeah, so I think a lot of people have kind of problems with this, thinking about the supernatural in the Bible. And I like to look at this not as changing anything that we believe, but as adding to it. So like moving from a 2D to 3D.
Yeah.
Or for those of us who are older, now I wasn't old enough to remember this because I think it was in 63 or 64. I wasn't born, but moving from black and white TV to color TV.
Doug, I'll have you know, being from South America, I remember well when color television came to Latin America, to specifically to Bolivia where I lived, and it was I remember commercials saying it's too the script of the voiceover. It's too bad the television's in black and white, or you would love to see these colors of the cars.
And these are like commercials.
Yeah, and we're talking about mid 70s, late 70s.
Oh wow!
Know?
Yeah, so you guys are a little bit later.
Oh, a little bit.
I remember that it was actually the first season of Star Trek. So that was I think 66. That was the year that they moved to color TV because I thought everything before that, Gilligan's Island, I think the first season of it was black and white, it was the same time, and then the next season color. Yeah, like Star Trek never would have worked if it was in black and white.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So
Roddenberry lucked out with that one.
Yeah.
So that's what we're doing. We're looking at Star Trek Living Color here when we come to the supernatural world. Yep. So what I want to do is kind of take this in 3 sections for people. And we're going to look at what he talked as the 3 falls of the Bible. So standard theology, going back really before Augustine, but he kind of popularized it with original sin, is really focused on the Garden of Eden story. Right, with Satan in the garden and the fall of Eve, and then giving it to Adam, and then Adam falls, and then in Adam we all fall, and so the whole idea of this is original sin. This is where we inherit our sin and stuff like that from, and so the church is really just focused on the Genesis 3 event. Now I won't get into this. This could be a different podcast altogether, but Dr. Heiser did not believe in original sin as taught in the doctrine of original sin, although he did believe that every single person was sinful. He got there a different way. But I think one of the reasons I think he did that is because he saw the second fall story of Genesis as really of more importance to the Jews than the Adam and Eve story. And I've thought about that a lot over the years, and I think he has a point, but I also think he probably underestimated or underspoke about the Genesis 3 story, because the Jews did write about that. They wrote entire books about it, like the book of Adam and Eve and stuff. So so that would be the second story. We're going to look at the Genesis 6 story and the fall of the Watchers to get the giants. That will help set us up for the Deuteronomy 32 stuff. And then the third fall story is also going to set us up for the Deuteronomy 32 stuff, because this is really the Tower of Babel story. And that's where we'll talk about the inheritance of the nations. So maybe like the epicenter of everything we're going to talk about is Deuteronomy 32, 7, 8, and 9. And so I want to go to that. And this was actually the passage that I first dove into this, because I actually was preaching on Exodus, something in Exodus. I don't remember what it was. And I had come across this article from this scholar that turned out to be Heiser on Deuteronomy 32:8, and a little textual variant at the end of this verse. The phrase is the sons of God. And a textual variant is basically when some scribe took whatever the text was and changed it for whatever reason. Maybe they thought that it was something else, or maybe they were trying to interpret it. And so the alternate reading of it is the sons of Israel. So sons of God or sons of Israel. That's a huge, huge deal.
Yeah.
And anyway, he wrote this huge paper on it, and I was so fascinated by it. That was my deep dive. So I'm going to read I'm going to read the 2 verses, and then I'll come back to the 3rd verse here a little bit later. But it says this: remember the days of old, consider the years of many generations. Ask your father, and he will show you, your elders, and they will tell you, when the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the people according to the number of the sons of God. So that's that's the ground zero for what we're going to look at. Everything that we're going to see here in this episode is going to kind of be focused laser like on that verse. And then, so it's almost like a funnel. So the Genesis stuff will go towards the middle of the funnel, and then that will take us outward to the New Testament and why this all matters, So you have any thoughts on all this?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is between the comparison of those two, the sons of God and the sons of Israel, that there's a lot of latitude for a lot of interpretation between those two, especially as it concerns to the watchers, So yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say about all this.
Yeah, remind me if we get all the way to the end and I don't talk about the difference there, because really the difference is kind of the end of where I want to take this thing with people, which focuses on Christ. So,
and just out of curiosity, or will this be revealed in the along the way? Your stance on original sin, does it line up with Heiser's?
No, I believe in original sin. I think it's a biblical doctrine. I understand why people have problems with it. But yeah, I also understand why he goes the way he goes, but like I said, that's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, totally.
And it would be a fun podcast too, I think.
I just wanted to get your thoughts kind of as you're laying down the foundation to know where your stance is on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a confessional Christian, so in the Confessions of Faith, we have like basically all these basic doctrines that are laid out for us in paragraph, in chapter form and stuff. So, I mean, if I didn't believe in that, then I wouldn't be able to call myself a confessional Christian. It's a pretty major doctrine, at least in the Western side of the church. So, So let's go to the kind of the first of these three stages, and this is going to be dealing with the fall or the falls of man. And this is going to center on the sons of God, this phrase, sons of God. You won't find it in the first text here, but you'll find it in the second one. So the first one is like the foundational verse for really the whole Bible. It's kind of I like to think of it as the thesis verse of the entire Bible. You're writing a thesis in 8th grade, they teach you, or a paper in 8th grade, they teach you to put your thesis in the first paragraph, right? And make sure everybody knows what it is. And to me, this is that verse. It's just so important. And this is the God cursing the serpent. And he says, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. So it's depicting a war. The war is between, first of all, you and the woman. So the Nahash, the serpent, and the woman. But then second of all, in parallelism, it's between your offspring and her offspring. So that's the seed. So he's going to have a seed and she's going to have a seed. Now, one little thing to kind of mention here is that you can think of these offspring both spiritually and physically. Okay. So spiritually, we can think of anybody who is offspring of Eve by faith, trusting in Christ, and anybody who's an offspring of the devil by unbelief. So Jesus calls the Pharisees sons of their father, the devil. Right. And, John talks about don't be like Cain, who was of the evil one.
Right.
And those kinds of things. So, and the father of lies, that's the kind of idea, spiritually speaking. But some people have taken like that Cain verse, and they'll go to Genesis 4:1, and they'll say, well, Cain was actually biologically also the son of Satan. And this is actually an old heretical Jewish teaching that's found its way into the church. And when you read that verse carefully, it's very clear that Adam lay with his wife and she gave birth to Cain.
Right.
So Cain is not the physical seed of Satan, but he is a spiritual seed. But, so other people, they'll kind of stop there and they'll go, all right, so it's only spiritual seed for Satan. And the answer to that is no, because the woman actually has physical offspring, not just spiritual offspring.
Correct.
Those physical offspring are going to be the people that eventually become the Jews, because the whole lineage is traced through Adam and Eve, right?
Right.
But the physical offspring of the Satan comes in the second of these three fall stories. All right. So in the first fall story, the woman eats the fruit, forbidden fruit. She falls into sin. Adam falls with her. And then this is what like Romans 5 is talking about, that all sin in Adam and stuff. So that's the original sin. That's the first fall of man. It's incredibly important to everything else, because here we have not only the explanation for human sin and depravity, but also for the gospel. Because as that verse finishes, the seed of the woman is going to crush the head of the seed of the serpent, right? So that's the gospel, the good news that we will get to by the end of this. But first we got to get to some intermediate stages, right? So second story. This is Genesis 6:1-4, one of these passages that a lot of people have no idea what to do with. I can remember early in my pastoral ministry, people asking me, and I just kind of said, I don't really know. And I just went with the standard answer of who these people were. And I said, well, basically what's going on here is that you have Christians marrying non-Christians. They're like, well, how does that create giants?
Right,
and I said,
right.
I don't have any idea.
Giant mistakes.
So, yeah. So then, reading Heiser was the first person that I saw that really kind of explained this in a way that I thought actually makes a lot of sense. So here's the text. Genesis 6:1-4. When man began to multiply in the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, and the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Then the Lord said, my spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh, and his days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men of old, men of renown. So it's this little four verses that set the stage for the flood event. And they feel like they're kind of out of place, and people don't really know what to do with it. We have long parallels in like the book of First Enoch, the book of Jubilees, and other places that talk about this in more detail, that give, and this is very important, they give the universal, the 100%, every single person on the planet that we know of opinion of what this meant. That includes every Jew, and that includes every Jew up through into the 2nd century, and every Christian into really the 4th century. Okay, so what does this mean? So let's pick this apart. Verse 1, when man began to multiply in the face of the land. So man, there's the word Adam. Very, very important. So this is the descendants of Adam. Okay?
Yeah.
When we know who he is, because we just saw that passage in Genesis 3.
Yep.
So Adam is multiplying in the land, and daughters were born to them. To who? To the sons of Adam.
Right.
Very, very important.
Yep.
So now the sons of God see the daughters of man are attractive. So daughters are born to them, and daughters of man are attractive. The same group. So who are the daughters of man according to the text? Well, they're the daughters of Adam. That's literally the word that's used.
Yep.
Daughters of Adam. Now, the kind of the historic interpretation, the one that most conservative Christians, I think, are used to hearing, is that the daughters of men are the daughters of Cain, and that the sons of God who see them are the sons of Seth.
Yep.
And this is something that you just cannot get from this text. It does not say Cain and Seth. It says the daughters of Adam. And
right.
Seth and Cain are both sons of Adam. It's not
Correct.
like one is son of Adam and the other one isn't, right?
Yep.
So that means that whoever the sons of God are, they're contrasted with the daughters of Adam. Now, they're not going to be the sons of Adam, because that would just mean people are marrying each other. That doesn't make any sense.
Right.
So who are in the world are the sons of God? So you have to go to other places in the scripture to really confirm this. But I think even here, we know who they are. If you go to like the Septuagint Greek translations, some of those translations say angels right there. But you can go to like Job 38:7, where God is like confronting Job with how wise he thinks he is. And he's like, well, where were you when I was laying the foundations of the earth and the sons of God were shouting for joy? So that's the same phrase, sons of God, B'nai Ha-Elohim, in the Hebrew, and it can't be humans because they're shouting for joy before God creates humans.
Created them.
Right?
Right.
So every other place that this is found, it either must mean heavenly beings like angels, or it can mean that. And I would argue that really it has to mean that in every case.
Agreed.
And so the sons of God here are heavenly beings because they're contrasted from the daughters of human beings. And so this becomes the only interpretation in the early church and with the Jews before the New Testament. Okay, so then it says they take wives of any that they chose. The taking there can either be, in marriage, or it could be like, because the word wives is really, they just take women. So it could be something worse than that. It could be like rape. It could be, it could be genetic tampering, I suppose. It could be all kinds of things that they were doing to them.
It could be the way El Guapo took the women.
The flower. The flower right. Must open itself.
That's the petal. You cannot force open the petals of the flower.
Would you say there are a plethora?
What is a plethora? I can quote that whole thing. That's ridiculous.
How can you not quote that whole thing?
No, it's amazing. Anyway, I digress.
Let's skip verse 3 because it's not really relevant to what we're talking about, other than the fact that God's going to punish the earth for it. So his days will be 120 years. Basically, the idea there is that 120 years from now, God's going to destroy the earth. And then a couple verses later, it says he's going to destroy all flesh because all flesh has corrupted itself. All flesh includes animals. Yeah. And so that also has to do with what these sons of God were doing. But that's for another time. So last verse, the Nephilim are on the earth in those days and also afterwards. So here we have these Nephilim, whatever they are, they're there before and after.
Yeah.
And then it says, when the sons of God came to the daughters of men and they bore children to them. So who are these Nephilim? The last verse tells you they are the mighty men of old, the men of renown. Now, a lot of people will say Nephilim just means fallen ones. And that's just simply not true. And we know that because the word only appears in one other verse in the Bible. And that's Numbers 13:33, where they're very clearly giants. The sons of Anak we're like grasshoppers to them. And the word is spelled two different ways in one verse. And the reason for that is because one of those spellings is Hebrew and one of them is Aramaic. And the reason for that is because the people later on reading the Old Testament all spoke Aramaic. And so they would have lost the meaning of the word. And so the editor would added that word in with the new spelling so that they would understand what the word Nephilim means. And that alternate spelling, the word means a giant. So a Nephilim is not a fallen one. A Nephilim is a giant. And that's why the Septuagint translates as giants. Now, they're mighty men of old and men of renown. This becomes Gibborim. These are mighty men, the Gibborim. And the Septuagint actually translates Nephilim and Gibborim the same way, both as gigantus. They're the giants.
Yeah.
Okay? So that takes us to the third story, our third fall story. So you can see that this fall story is bad news, and God ends up destroying the earth because of it.
Yeah.
Third fall story, after the flood, God destroyed everything, and now the sons of Noah have expanded. We start in Genesis 10. Genesis 10 is a genealogy. 70 nations are there, 70 nations. And this includes one fellow who's the only one who gets any kind of playtime at all in Genesis 10. His name is Nimrod. And it says that Cush fathered Nimrod. This is Genesis 10, 8, 9, and 10. He was the first on earth to be a mighty man. There's our word again, mighty man, the Gibborim. So a lot of people think that Nimrod is somehow related to the giants here because he's given the same title. And I think that that's right. I agree with that. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. You could also translate that as against the Lord. So in other words, he's fighting against the Lord. Therefore, it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. The beginning of his kingdom was Babel. And then it gives other cities. And this is really important because Babel is what we find in the next chapter, chapter 11. Babel then is Nimrod gathering all the people of the world together. They come to build a tower. This tower is basically a reimagining of the Garden of Eden. It's a giant mountain, a giant ziggurat. Eden was a mountain, as we know from Ezekiel. And so they're basically trying to recreate the meeting place where God is on earth with man, except for instead of God doing the creation and him putting man on it, they do the creation and put themselves on it.
Right, right.
And then they try to contact the gods, and then for it, God punishes mankind and separates them into the 70 nations of the world, according to the genealogy. All right. So that becomes the third fall story. And it's into this that we're going to move to stage 2 of what we're going to look at tonight. So in this stage 1, we've looked at the sons of God, and we've also kind of seen the beginnings of something that will come up here that we read earlier with this idea of the number of sons of God are divided according to the men are divided according to the number of the sons of God, dividing, inheriting, all this kind of stuff. So let's go back to Deuteronomy 32, 7, 8. And we'll stop there again, but we're going to go through it this time a little bit more closely. So it says, remember the days of old. Consider the years of many generations. Ask your father, he will show you, and your elders, and they will tell you. So Moses is old. He lived a long time ago. And he says this was in the old days, many generations before him. Then verse 8, he says, the Most High. So Most High is the word El Elyon here. And this is a title that is almost always used when God is being related to the Gentiles. And that's no difference here. So the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, and he divides mankind and fixes people according to the number of the sons of God. So notice that you have the Most High and sons of God here. So if sons of God is the right reading, then what we have is the Most High is the Father, and sons of God are sons, because sons receive inheritances from fathers.
Right.
Now, when is this? Well, he tells you when it was. It was when he divided mankind. And when does God divide mankind? Well, he does it at the Tower of Babel. Okay? So Tower of Babel is what we just looked at. That puts us squarely in that third fall area. And then it talks about the number of the sons of God. So now this is not explicit here in the text, but everybody knew it back then what that number was. And we see this, for example, in the Targum of this verse. The Targum is basically a Jewish paraphrase in Aramaic of the Old Testament, where they would sometimes add just very little, kind of like the Living Bible or something, where it's not a word for word translation, but it's trying to get the idea across.
Right.
And then other times they'll have like longer expansions. But in this case, they basically say, according to the 70 sons of God, the angels of the nations. So 70, where would that idea of 70 come from? Well, it comes from the 70 nations in the table of nations in Genesis 10. So, sons of God, 70, nations, 70. And this means that every nation is given a God to rule over it. That's the idea here of this worldview. Now, people all of a sudden, they freak out as soon as you start talking about a God to rule over it. What in the world are you talking about? So we need to look at one more thing here, which is verse 9. And I'm only going to focus on the kind of the verbs here, or the non-nouns, all right? The non-subjects. It says, but the Lord's portion is his people, and Jacob his allotted heritage. So portion and allotment and inheritance. That's what we're going to focus on here. So the Lord is inheriting Israel, or Jacob, while the sons of God are inheriting the other 70 nations. So now we need to go through to this is where Mike talked about the Deuteronomy 32 worldview, or and the Deuteronomy worldview, because it's not just this verse, but there's others as well. So the next verse in this sequence, in this part 2, is Deuteronomy 4:19 and 20. And it says this: beware lest you raise your eyes to heaven, and when you see the sun and the moon and the stars, all the host of heaven, you be drawn away and bow down to them and serve them, those that the Lord your God has allotted to all the peoples under the whole heaven. But the Lord has taken you and brought you out of the iron furnace, out of the Egypt, to be a people of his own inheritance. So actually, these verses completely, exactly parallel what we just read in Deuteronomy 32:8 and 9. So you have in the verse 19, you have people worshiping and bowing down to the sun, moon, and the stars, which are called the host of heaven, and they're worshiping them. And it says God allotted them to the people. Same language as Deuteronomy 32.
Yep.
But the Lord inherits Israel. Same thing as Deuteronomy 32:9. Second verse, second passage here is Deuteronomy 17:3. Because people don't like the language of gods, but it's because they don't understand what the gods are. People think, well, if you believe in more than one God, then you must be some sort of a polytheist that puts all gods on an equal playing field. And that's just not biblical at all. The creator God is totally distinct and different from any so-called gods that he has created. Just because they share the word gods, or in Hebrew Elohim, it doesn't mean that they all share all of his attributes. Okay. So verse 17:3 helps us understand this, because it's a parallel to what we just read in chapter 4. It says, and they have gone and served other gods and worshiped them, the sun, the moon, or any of the host of heaven, which I have forbidden. So that verse actually calls the sun and the moon and the host of heaven gods. That's what the verse says. I didn't make that up. That's what Moses said.
Absolutely.
Okay. Then you have the last one will be Deuteronomy 29:26. Says, and they went and served other gods and worshiped them, gods they had not known and whom he had not allotted to them. So isn't that interesting? Because now you have the gods being allotted instead of the sun, moon, and stars and hosts of heaven being allotted. What does it mean? He didn't allot them to them. So this is where I want to bring in. A fellow that Dr. Heiser was not aware of until I read this to him, and he was kind of blown away by this verse, and he started using it afterwards. It says from Plato, and this is from his Critias, which is one of the two places where he really talks about his whole story of Atlantis. And in it, he talks about Poseidon being the god of Atlantis. And this is what he has to say, because it's really interesting. And in fact, there's church fathers like Justin Martyr that said that Plato actually gets this from Moses, which means that somehow there was contact between the Jews and the Greeks way, 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 way back in like the 7th century or earlier, BC. Listen to how he starts this. In the days of old, the gods had the whole earth distributed among them by allotment. That's not Moses, that's Plato.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing.
It's crazy, right?
Absolutely.
And then he goes, there was no quarreling, for you cannot rightly suppose that the gods did not know what was proper for each of them to have, or knowing this, that they would seek to procure for themselves by contention that which more properly belongs to others. They, all of them, by just appointment, obtained what they wanted and peopled their own districts. And when they had peopled them, they tended us, their nurslings, and possessions, as shepherds tend their flocks. And then he goes on to say that Hephaestus and Athena were distributed and received Greece by allotment, because we are the wise and good people of the earth.
Very interesting. That's very, very interesting.
So, Greece gets one particular god, and Babylon gets another, and so on and so forth. And there's another way to help people see this, that doesn't use the term Elohim or gods, but uses the term prince. Okay, so you go to Daniel 10, for example, and you find Daniel 10:13. It talks about the prince of Persia would not let the angel, they were having a battle. And it took 3 weeks for him to answer Daniel's prayer because the prince of Persia was like somehow blocking him. Now, explain to me how, if this is talking about, like a King Cyrus or something, how a human king, could block an angel for 3 weeks.
Not happening.
Not happening.
It's not happening.
And then you also have, just a few verses later, Daniel 10:20, it talks about the prince of Greece. Well, that's literally what Plato just talked about. These are the princes of the gods. It's the same idea. The princes are the gods, or the watchers are the angels. They're all just different terms that convey different senses of who these entities are and what they're doing.
Definitely.
Okay, so biblical idea, we see it right here in Deuteronomy. And if you can get your head wrapped around the fact that there are these entities that have been allotted to the nations, and that God said, you're not to worship these entities because you are my people. Whereas those people, they were given to them, and they were given to them, by the way, as a punishment. Really, it's a punishment to both the gods because they get us, not exactly what you want to inherit.
Right.
When you know anything about how wicked we are, but we get them, and not exactly what you want when you understand how wicked Satan is, right?
Right.
So,
exactly.
And by the way, Satan, I believe, is the prince of Rome.
Yeah.
So,
do tell.
That helps put a different spin on it. You put a name to it, then all of a sudden you can go, oh my goodness, the prince of Rome. Yeah, this is why he could offer Jesus all the kingdoms of the world, because the Roman Empire ruled the world, and he was the prince of Rome.
Yeah.
So this is a punishment. They're getting each other, and let's see what will happen. That's basically the idea. God knows full well what's going to happen. These guys are going to, and Plato even says this. He's like, well, in the beginning, it worked really well. It was the golden age, it was perfect harmony, peace between us and the gods, but something went sour, and we all started to get prideful, and sin after sin after sin, and then you end up with where we're at today. Basically, that's what he says.
Yeah.
I mean, this is literally why he's telling this, is because Atlantis is destroyed for their wickedness, and Poseidon was put over them. So this is not a good thing. Because God created us to worship him, all humans, all people born from Adam. And we see that worship taking place even in Genesis 4 with Cain and Abel. Cain does it wrong, but he's still worshiping the Lord. Abel does it right. Cain gets mad, he kills him.
Right.
People begin to call upon the name of the Lord later on at the end of that chapter. So what we're seeing here in this Deuteronomy 32 worldview is basically God pulling Israel out of this darkness of the worship of the gods and saying, you are going to be my treasured possession. And so that takes us to the third stage of how I help people to understand this worldview. And for this one, we need to look very closely at verse 9 of Deuteronomy 32. Okay, so we've gone through 32, 7, and 8. We've mentioned verse 9, but now we're going to look at verse 9 in a little different way. And this is something that, for whatever reason, I never read or heard or saw Dr. Heiser talk about this in this way. But I think it's necessary, okay? So that verse says, the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob his allotted heritage, or his allotted inheritance. So the question becomes, who is the Lord there? Who is the Lord there? Well, the word is Yahweh. And most people, I think, just with their mind, they just go, oh, it must be the Father. Or if they don't think Father, Son, Spirit, they just think, well, it must just be God. It must just be God. So they think about just the one being. But think about verse 8. When the Most High gave according to the number of the sons of God. So we saw the Father, Most High, sons of God. Sons receive inheritances, right?
Right.
So verse 9, the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob, his allotted heritage. If the Lord here is receiving an inheritance, what does that make him of necessity? A son. Has to be. Because fathers don't receive anything and God as an inheritance. And God, as God, already has everything. So this has to be talking about the persons of the Godhead.
Yep.
Verse 9 is the angel of the Lord. This is the Son of God receiving Israel as his inheritance. Hugely, hugely important.
Yep.
Okay. So now after, if you go through the storyline and you go, you start to see that God comes to Abraham and he takes him outside and says, see the number of the stars up there? That's how many of your descendants are going to be. And then a couple of chapters later, he goes, hey, Abraham, I'm going to change he goes, hey, Abram, I'm going to change your name to Abraham, father of many nations. That's the promise that's going on here with the son part of it. So you have to ask yourself, who in the world is this God that's covenanting with Abraham?
Yeah.
And again, it's not just God in general, it's the Son of God, because he shows up as the angel of the Lord. He washes his feet. He has a face-to-face with him over who's going to be killed in Sodom.
Yeah.
They're talking to each other. They see each other. They hear each other.
Yeah.
It's an embodied experience. It's the Son of God.
Yeah.
Okay? And he's called simply here, he's just called the Lord. The Lord. And Jacob is his allotted inheritance. So it's into this that we come to the second verse of this third part. And this is really most of Psalm 2, but it's verse 8. But let's read the whole thing here.
Can I put just a real quick question on you? Not necessarily a question, just an interesting observation. Though, by the way, talk a little bit about because I talked to you during research a while back, probably about 2 years ago. The importance of the begotten Son of God. That he says that God, for God sent his only begotten Son.
Right.
That word is important. Why is that word important?
Very important. Well, okay, great question too, and very relevant, because if you have sons of God, and then this is the Son of God in verse 9, is he any different than the other sons of God? And the answer is yes. He's the begotten Son of God.
Very important.
Well, what in the world does that mean? Well, the word is kind of doing triple duty, actually. It can mean only begotten. So in that sense, he's the only eternally begotten Son of God. In other words, he's not created.
Right.
He's always eternally the Son, whereas all these other sons are created. Okay, he's also the unique Son. So the word begotten could derive from the Greek word monogenes there can either come from the root to beget or unique. Those are very similar Greek words. So if he's the unique Son, it's the same idea. There's no other Son like this Son. In what way? Well, because he's very God of very God. He is God.
Right.
In fact, John 1:18, it kind of helps people see this, and it really freaks people out when they read it in the ESV. So it says, no one has ever seen God, the only God. That's actually literally the only begotten God.
Yeah.
Who is at the Father's side has made him known. Well, wait. There's two gods in that verse. No one has ever seen God. The only God who is at the Father's side has made him known. What? How in the world am I supposed to make sense of that?
Right.
How can there be two gods? Well, it's because it's speaking of God in the persons here, not in the divine essence. There's only one God. That's clear everywhere in the Bible.
Yeah.
But in the sense of there is a Father God and there is a Son God. In this case, the Father's mentioned by name, but the Son is called the only begotten. The ESV just calls him the unique Son. So he's the only God. He's unique. And then the other one is beloved. There's also a wordplay with beloved, but with those. And beloved is what, the Father calls Jesus at his baptism and at the transfiguration, my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased. Nobody else gets that title from God except for the eternal Son of God. In the Old Testament, he's the angel. In the New Testament, he's Jesus. Does that answer that question?
Absolutely. Yeah, like I said, I felt it was relevant to bring that one up right there because I know that at one point, in working on that particular segment, the controversy or the sons of God. The Bible goes out of the way. At least the translation, our translation, goes out of its way to say that he's the only begotten Son. So that differentiates him than all, like you said, all the created gods.
And super important question, just for us to realize that this Son here is unique. There is no one like him. He is not just the first of many. He is before all things and created the many.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. But nevertheless, he's still receiving an inheritance. And that inheritance at this point in time, starting with Abraham and going into the nation of Israel, is that people, the Jewish people. They are his allotted inheritance. But it doesn't stay that way. And this is what's so cool. And this is why I love giving people this whole kind of series of verses in a row, because it really helps them see why in the world this supernatural worldview matters. And it matters because it's the most Christocentric, God-exalting, Christ-honoring thing I can tell people, in terms of salvation history, in terms of us, uniting humans and heavenly beings together, in terms of the whole package, right? So Psalm 2 is the second stage in this. So Deuteronomy 32:9 is the first stage in this part of it, because he's inheriting Israel. Now Psalm 2 expands it. It starts off with the question, why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? So nations and peoples, that's fine. And the kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel. Now that's an interesting one, because kings of the earth is set against the rulers, which would make you tend to think the rulers aren't of the earth. And in fact, that's the same word in the Greek translation of the Old Testament as the prince of Persia. The rulers are the heavenly beings, I believe.
Yeah.
So the kings of the earth and their correspondent heavenly rulers, they're all counseling against who? Well, now you have another pair, the Lord and against his anointed. So the first Lord is the Father, and the second is the Son. He's called the anointed, or the Messiah.
Yep. His anointed. Okay?
And then what do? They say, let's burst their bonds apart and cast away their cords from us. In other words, we don't want to obey anything they have to tell us. We do not want them to be our master.
Yep.
So then it says, he who sits in the heavens laughs, and the Lord holds them in derision. So I think Father and Son here are laughing and scoffing at this stupidity of the people and the gods. And why? Because it says, he will speak to them in his wrath and terrify them in his fury, saying, as for me, I have set my king on Zion, my holy hill. I will tell of the decree. The Lord said to me, you are my son. Today I have begotten you. There's your begotten word, although It's different in Hebrew.
Right.
But nevertheless, it's still the same idea. So this is one of the most, verse 7 here is one of the most quoted verses in the New Testament for Jesus. So this is a psalm about Jesus, the one, the Lord and his anointed, that's Father and Jesus. The one who sits in heaven laughs, and the Lord holds him in derision. That's Jesus and the Father. And then again here, I have set my king on my holy hill. That's Father sets the Son on his holy hill. I have said, you are my son. Today I've begotten you. And then verse 8 is the one that's so relevant. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage, and the ends of the earth your possession. So in other words, Israel was never meant to be the end all of this. Israel was supposed to bring the nations to God through their own righteousness and missionary endeavors, but they didn't do it. But God knew that, and God had a plan anyways. And we know that because he changed Abraham's name to the father of many nations, not just one nation.
Right.
So then you come to Psalm 82, which is the capstone of this whole deal. And it says this. We'll read the whole text here. God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. So the world is the divine council. Well, this is the court of heaven, It is heavenly beings. And in Psalm 89, it's very explicit that this court, this council, is in heaven, in the skies, and that it is God's. It's angelic beings.
Again, very reminiscent of the way that the Greeks imagined the pantheon of gods.
And and not just the Greeks. And it's not just Mount Olympus. You find this in Scandinavia. You find this in Japan. You find this in the American Indians. You find this in the Mesoamericans. The Aztecs have it.
Yeah.
The Egyptians have it. The Babylonians have it. Everybody has it. This is not unique to Israel. What's unique is how they conceive of the God who is over the divine council.
Yeah.
He can't be deposed. He's not like Zeus or, before him Kronos, who can just be taken out.
Right.
Because he's the creator God.
So I don't want to derail you from the main thread that you've got going. When we interviewed, his name escapes me right now, our Egyptian linguistics guy in Cairo, he made a very he kind of picked on me a little bit, because I said to him, what does in imagining what heaven looks like, the average person imagines, you have the Trinity and you got a bunch of angels, right? But really, if you look at it from a pragmatic standpoint, there is, and I used the word, and he made fun of me at first, but then he had to take it back. I said there is a civilization, if you will, in heaven. And he kind of laughed at me, and he said, he in good fun, the good spirit is being funny. But I said, you Americans, you guys like, like your order, your civilization, I don't know that I'd call it a civilization. But when he started talking about it, he said, so what is heaven like? He said, you have ranks, you have he goes, I don't think he needs bodyguards, but he's got ministers, and he said, so I guess you could call it a civilization, So he had to kind of cave on that and go and use that word. But so my question to you would be, and I'd love your thoughts on this, would be, when we're talking about a council, when we're talking about ministers, obviously every single being in that council, minus the begotten Son and the Holy Spirit, was created by God, And so what capacity do you feel that they function in that council? It certainly can't be, it isn't, I'll just say it isn't in an advisory capacity. God doesn't need them to, I want to make sure that I'm getting that I'm doing the right thing. Do you concur? I don't see that being the case. What do you feel that looks like?
Yeah, it's not advisory in the sense that God needs somebody to help him think through how he's going to govern the world, right?
Right.
But it's that God gave to these. This would also another bunny trail, but it could be in a whole nother show.
Yeah,
God gave to his sons of God, whether they're heavenly or earthly, his image, and so he wants them to rule as vice regents, if you think of it like that, as little princes, where he's the king, because it pleases him to give beings intelligence and self-awareness and consciences and all these kinds of things. He wants to share that with his creation. It's called communicable attributes. Incommunicable attributes are that God's omnipotent, omnipresent, all knowing, all those kinds of things. The only one who is without sin. But communicable attributes are things like knowledge. We have knowledge. We just don't have all knowledge.
Yeah.
Right. We have holiness, but we're not perfectly holy, and we can fall away from that.
Yeah.
So these communicable attributes in us they're mutable. They change in us.
Yeah.
We can do them well, or we can do them not well. And so we're actually going to see, as this psalm continues, just in the next 3 verses, part of what it was that they were supposed to do, and what he originally gave them, set them over the nations to do. Like God didn't just do it punitive. It was that, but he also wanted them to rule well, and that's where that idea that Plato in the Golden Age comes from. What, you know, how perverted or whatever his idea of that was, it's neither here nor there. The point was they were supposed to rule well because he gave them authority. He gave them rulership over the nations. And just like God gave Adam dominion in the Garden of Eden as his son, Adam was the son of God, as Luke calls him. You know. And what's the point of that? Well, dominion is one of the main points of being a son of God. Rulership, authority over the sphere that God put you in charge.
Yeah. Which I guess works you know, in a microcosm as much as it does all in proportion. You know, he continues to give from the princes. Well, princes of the air, I guess, became something else, but yeah, that dominion goes down. You've got his creation ruling over the air, you know, the powers of the air, Adam over the garden, et cetera, to all the way down to us, our individual houses, land, purposes, careers, you know.
Exactly. I mean, the creation mandate of dominion for Adam was the earth. And so all his children, it's wherever they are on the earth, you know. And then the idea seems to be that in the heavenly realms, the sons of God had rulership up there. But this place is such a great jewel, this earth, that they wanted it for themselves. And God didn't give it to them. And that really made Satan upset. And so he, you know, that's really the impetus for the temptation and why he wanted Eve to fall, hoping that if she and Adam fell, that they'd be cast away, which is exactly what happened, and that maybe they might get authority, which is exactly what happened.
Yeah. Right, exactly.
So we will come back to the idea of the gods here in a minute, but because it's also related to the Israel sons of God thing in Deuteronomy 32:8. But we can't. I want to give us more information so that we can understand better why that change is in that Deuteronomy 32:8 verse and what is going on in verse 1 here. But let's look first and see what they did. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? And then Selah is the word that means pause, probably. And give justice to the weak and the fatherless. Maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked. So God is like, I set you as judges over the peoples, and you refuse to do what I told you to do. Now, people will say, well, gods can't judge like that. They don't do anything for the widows and the... Well, of course they do. That's the whole point of God, the Lord, setting up these laws in the book of Deuteronomy and other places where he is the God of the orphan and the widow. That's what he says throughout the Psalms. I'm the God of the orphan and the widow. I take care of the helpless and the homeless. And so that was the job they were supposed to do. How? Well, first and most important way is by giving the people just laws so that they would actually know how to live and rightly, but they didn't do that. They gave them corrupt laws that caused, just like what we're seeing in our civilization right now, when the law goes away, what happens to the people? And so if somehow there's a spiritual element component to the laws that are given to the nations, well, these creatures did not do what they were supposed to do. So this idea that gods can't rule is ridiculous. They rule through the king, just like Yahweh appoints Saul and then David and then David's children after him to rule in his stead as really a vice regent, as a king of this particular area. God's still sovereign over the whole thing and the King of Kings, but it's this more microcosm of places where they rule.
Do you think that during those early years, which you know, we're talking about over such a big span of time, from a practical standpoint, from a working standpoint, it would seem to me that a lot of those sons that were ruling, these princes that were ruling these areas that God assigned to them, they were probably working cross realm, wouldn't you think, with kings, with authorities, with the leadership, if you will, of the human realm, I would think. No?
Every ancient culture believed that the kingship came from the gods, that the gods established
Absolutely.
a particular group of people.
Yes.
And so that by definition, you have to have some sort of interaction between the gods and the king. How did that happen? Was it physically in person? Was it through visions? Was it in dreams? Was it through smoking ayahuasca? I don't know how it happened.
The thing is, I mean, and we know this, that in a lot of the civilizations, the kings were seen as almost as gods. So it makes you wonder. It makes you wonder if in order to prop up the kingdoms or prop up the kings, if maybe, like for example, the story of Pharaoh and Moses, you know, where they actually were given a certain amount of superpower or supernatural power, whether it be through their witch doctor that a lot of these people had, you know, or their chief magician or whatever, but something that gave them clout, something that gave them believability of the supernatural, so that the common man would fear him. Don't you think?
Yeah. Well, we could go down like a conspiracy bunny trail for this one, although I think there's biblical justification for it. So when God picked Saul, it's really interesting because it says that he was a head taller than all the other people.
Right.
And the reason why is because the Israelites wanted a king like all the other kings had. What does that mean?
Yeah.
Well, I think what it means is that the other kings, the original bloodlines, were Nephilim. They were the ones who ruled. And this is why you have, like in Greek mythology, the demigods are the ones ruling here on earth.
Yeah.
That's the Nephilim are the parallel to the demigods of the Greeks.
Yeah.
Or the Babylonians or wherever you want to go. So if that's true, then that means that those kings actually had something in their bloodline that already had what you're talking about. The I don't know how it works, right? But the ability to have increased divination or magic or whatever the case might be.
Well, we know that a lot of the ites, for example, a lot of them had definitely had Nephilim blood. And then on the table of nations, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, and I know that Gary Wayne said this, that they are the only branch in the family tree that doesn't have a beginning, you know. So yeah, we do know that, at least we know that the ites had a lot of them, and a lot of the kingdoms that were ordered to be destroyed and burned down to the ground, you know, cats, dogs, everything, had ties to the Nephilim.
You remember when King Saul, he loses his kingship, really, because he sacks this place and takes this guy named Agag, the Amalekite, who's the king, and he keeps him alive. And he's like, well, God will be really happy with me for that. And Samuel comes in, he's furious.
Right.
Well, the thing is that Agag, we don't get descriptions of his height, although the Jews, if you go and read Jewish folklore and rabbis and stuff, they all say that he was a giant.
Really?
And the reason why is because he came from the Amalekites. And the Amalekites are one of those groups in Genesis 14 that are in the giant wars. Okay, so another perfect example. So God wanted these people utterly destroyed, and Saul wouldn't do it. And so he loses the kingship.
Yeah.
It's interesting that God gave Israel, in one way, somebody who looked like these other kings, but he wasn't. He was still just a Jew. So then he picks David, who's just like this little runt guy, you know, probably 5'4", 5'5", something like that. Because when he ends up fighting Goliath, you know, that's the whole storyline. That's the seed storyline.
The little guy.
The woman's seed crushing the head, which he literally did. He literally cuts off Goliath's head, the seed of the serpent.
Yeah.
So verse 5 now, so these gods are supposed to rule justly. They don't. God gives another statement here. They have neither knowledge nor understanding. They walk about in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken. Well, what is that talking about? Well, it's because heavenly beings are ruling wickedly everywhere. It's into this actually, and this and the Deuteronomy stuff, that Paul goes to Athens. And he tells these people, no, God's near every one of you. You've just been groping around in darkness because whoever's been ruling over you, this is evil. But this unknown God, I want to proclaim him to you. And all you have to do is call upon him, you know. So he calls the Athenians out of that darkness. The foundations of the earth are shaken everywhere, and gives them the gospel. Verse 6 is really important. It says, I said, you are gods, sons of the Most High, all of you. So here's the sons of God again, sons of the Most High. It's the exact same idea as Genesis 6. It's the same idea as Deuteronomy 32:8, the sons of God. They keep showing up in all these places. They're all talking about the same storyline. It's not a coincidence.
Yeah.
I said, you are gods, sons of the Most High, all of you. Nevertheless, like men, you shall die. Well, now wait a minute. Some people will say that the gods here are the Jews or the rulers of Israel. Where does that come from? So now it takes us back up to verse 1. You go in and read the New American Standard Version, it would say something like, God has taken his place in the great assembly, the assembly of Israel. In the midst of the rulers, he holds judgment. And the idea there is that they're interpreting this as saying that God is judging the rulers of Israel for ruling badly. But the thing is, there's no justification for that anywhere in the context of this psalm, or in the parallel with Psalm 89, or in the Deuteronomy 32 worldview, which is all the passages that we've been looking at. Think about this. Why would a man be told that he's going to die like a man? That's called a tautology. It's redundant, and it's not necessary to say. And when it says fall like
an insult,
it's ridiculous to say that.
Right.
Say like fall like any prince. Well, they are princes because they're archons. They're the gods of the nations, so they will fall. They're not exempt from being judged.
Right.
Paul says that. Don't you know you will judge angels? Satan is going to be judged. Satan's going to be cast in the lake of fire.
Yeah.
So yes, these creatures do have an end, and that's the point here. But then verse 8 comes along. Arise, O God, judge the earth, for you shall inherit all the nations. Now remember, in Deuteronomy, the Son of God inherited Israel. In Psalm 2, the promise was that if he asked, he would inherit the nations. Now, this one is, arise, O God, and judge the earth. Who is that? Has to be the Son of God.
Right.
And now it's no longer, just ask me and I'll give it to you. Now it's a done deal.
Yeah.
You shall inherit the nations. Why? Because this God has just taken his place in the divine council, this Son of God, and he has just held court and showed them that they are all guilty of violating the law and they will be punished.
Yeah.
Meaning that there's only one left standing. And what will happen? He will inherit the nations. And this is the language and the promise into which Jesus is born of a woman. Very important, because in the Old Testament, he's not a woman. He's not born of a woman. In the Old Testament, he is an angel. In the New Testament, he comes as a man. He comes as the Son of Man and the Son of God, both man and God. Because the gods held rule. He is the King of Kings, and the only God can do what he's going to do. But the promise was given to men, to Adam. The promise was given that that they would be sons of God. And so in the New Testament, Christians become sons of God.
Do me a favor, if you don't mind. Expand a little bit. You said in the Old Testament, he comes as an angel. Are you making reference to the angel of
the angel of the Lord? Yeah.
Yeah.
In the Old Testament,
for the people that don't know, expand on that just a little bit, if you would, because like what you're saying makes total sense.
So in the Old Testament, Jesus is the angel of the Lord. He comes as the angel of the Lord. He is the angel is the God of Israel. Jacob says, my God, the angel who is with me all my days. The angel is the one who says, I covenant with Israel. I'm the one who covenanted with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You broke my covenant, he says. This is the Son of God who's inheriting Israel. In the New Testament, he doesn't have angel flesh. He's not an angel. He is now incarnated in human flesh. He was not a human being before this.
Right.
Almost everybody gets this wrong. the angel of the Lord is not a human. He's an angel. He doesn't have human flesh. He has angel flesh, whatever that is. He's not a human being. He's not incarnate in the sense of being a human being in the Old Testament. He's still there. Likely, he's still real.
And likely that same entity type that crosses back and forth between realms a lot. You know, the guy,
yeah, sure.
the guy that can bring the Annunciation to Mary, the guy that can fight with the Prince of Persia, you know, and the guys that can sit down in Sodom and Gomorrah and have dinner with
exactly
with Lot's nephew, you know.
So the angel, and in fact, me and my buddy Matt, who wrote the Angel of the Lord book with me, we talk about this idea called the poof theory. Some people are like, well, God is just kind of poofing in for a moment, and then this whatever this thing is that called the angel of the Lord, it just poofs out of existence. No, it doesn't. It goes back to heaven. Heaven's a real place. It doesn't. It's like it's not like he exists and then he doesn't exist. He's there. He's up here. Now he comes down here. Then he goes back up there. He comes back down here.
It's just by the laws of physics of the spirit realm, that particular type of being can do that. We perceive it as poof.
Yes.
They're just waltzing back and forth as they need to.
Yep. Now somehow in the womb of Mary, this second person of the Trinity that was somehow the angel of the Lord. Now this second person is this man Jesus. Don't ask me how all that works because I have no idea. But I believe that's what the scripture
absolutely
teaches. It's completely unique in all of world history. So
absolutely.
Good luck understanding it. But we can at least explain.
It's up there with truly and honestly, you know, in a manner without faith, trying or claiming or trying to understand how the Trinity works. You know, we just don't. You know, and that's okay. Because some things have to be relegated to faith. So yeah, you're right.
And that faith is not irrational, and we can think through it, but it is faith. You have to believe these things are true.
And the Bible tells us that we will understand it one day, which I think is amazing. You know,
great point. So Jesus comes, and as the man, then he carries out all these things Adam was supposed to do, and then he ends up inheriting the nations. He becomes, all authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. So go and make disciples of what? Of all nations. This is the fulfillment, initial fulfillment of Jesus taking his reign and authority. We're not waiting for him to carry out, to somehow pick up authority in the future. He has all authority right now. Something that a lot of people forget, especially when times get really bad and they think God has forgotten us or doesn't care or isn't able to do anything about it. No, Jesus has that authority right now. He's delegated that authority to the church. And if the church decides that they're going to drop that authority by not preaching the law and the gospel, then what do you expect is going to happen in this world? Right. So Rudy, that's how this worldview is so important to me, why I've been so fixated on for so long, and why I love to tell people about it. And you know, it's a hard thing to get your mind wrapped around, especially if you're not used to thinking about supernatural kinds of things, but it's not impossible to do. And there are certain texts that we can go to that create a thread, a narrative that teach us this other side of redemptive history that comes from the supernatural world. And that's why I said it's kind of like moving into living color, because it's not just God talking to men and then salvation is only about us. This is about the whole universe. This involves his heavenly creation. It involves our interactions with them, our failings with them, our sins and idolatry, our fall at the Tower of Babel in Genesis 6 and Genesis 3. All those have supernatural components with the gods right there with them. And we see the punishment in the Old Testament. We see how God gave the nations over to darkness to worship, and they ended up worshiping these creatures. And it's into that incredible wickedness that the grace of God shines so brighter, if you understand this, than it does apart from it. Because you can see just how much he overcame in sending Christ. And it's not just that he overcame our sin, which is infinitely incredible enough.
Yeah.
But he overcomes the demonic satanic world as well, defeats them, deposes them, disinherits them, and Jesus ends up taking all the nations, which is beginning now in the Great Commission, and one day will be, culminated when he returns again.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's it makes me wonder sometimes, in a key moment, such a key moment, crucial moment in the grand scheme of God's plan, his perfect plan of salvation, what the spirit world must have looked like in the moments leading up to the crucifixion of Jesus. We know that there's, activity and, for example, the angel fighting with the Prince of Persia. If there's resistance on a simple message, if there's this fight going on, can you imagine what it must have looked like in the spiritual realm on the days leading up, or on the day of the most important event in the history of creation?
I mean, I think C.S. Lewis tries to get at that a little bit with all the wicked creatures, that are going after Aslan, try to kill him, and then when they end up killing him, and they're all standing around the table and stuff like that. I mean, those are your chimeras right there. The demonic hordes, the cows of Bashan, all that kind of stuff. I think the Gospels, when we really start to read the Gospels and what Jesus is doing, especially in the supernatural world in his ministry, and then leading up to him going into Jerusalem, you really can see this attack and this, digging your feet in and getting ready for this final, what they think will be the final battle where they put him to death.
Yeah.
It's really amazing. So it's not just the Pharisees. I mean, it's the devil himself. I mean, he's entering Judas. He's going after Peter. The things leading up to that at the transfiguration, and
Jesus is trying to pray, and they're sleeping.
Exactly.
And he's all but told them they're going to kill me. He's literally just told them that at the Last Supper. And can you just back me up in prayer? And these guys can't keep their eyes open, So yeah, I mean, it's very, you're right. You're absolutely right. It's very, very obvious that there's so much happening in that spiritual world
that we don't think about. And once your eyes are open to this supernatural realm in a way that's real. So I know it's such a weird thing to me that as conservative Christians, we believe in the supernatural. We believe in God, a Trinity. We believe in a resurrection. We believe in the deity of Christ. We believe in miracles. We say that we believe these things, but as soon as you start talking,
stop right there, though. But stop right there. Don't go much further. Don't get deeper into it.
Exactly what it is. It's almost surreal, and I think we've been taken over by materialism and naturalism and evolution and rationalism, way, way, way more than we like to think that we have.
Oh, absolutely. It's funny when we started the film, the Angels and Giants. I have a very dear friend of mine who's one of our editors, who was an Answer Quest, and great guy, man. He's a solid believer, been a believer, probably most of his life, and so he was trying to wrap his brain around what the film was about, So I told him, it was, the story of the Nephilim, and Genesis 6, and he looks at me, and again, man, if you knew this guy, you'd say, I know this guy's a Christian, he's a believer. But he looks at me, he goes, really? And I said, yeah. And he goes, you have enough to do a 2-hour special on that, And I said, dude, you could make a career out of this,
Yeah,
people have exactly. There is so much to talk about, because I think that's where the disconnect happens, that the mention of the Nephilim is so brief in that passage that it kind of gets siloed into its own little account of this little thing here, and that's it. Well, people don't realize that it's basically if you were looking at it underwater, it's just the hump of the whale that keeps that goes back underneath.
Exactly.
It's such a big and all encompassing subject, and like you're right, and when you start to see it that way, you realize that it really underscores what a thread, what a perfect thread, there's a word for it, a stream of consciousness, the entire story of the Bible is. You know, it is an unbroken stream. Once you start to see that way, you just see that it really, that battle that gets declared in the garden rages on every single verse in chapter and verse of the Bible, all the way to
it's
today.
always there, always there.
Yeah.
Now, one maybe the kind of last thing to tell people is that a lot of people think that this is not knowable stuff, and that you're just speculating about all this stuff, you know, and you're running to the pseudepigrapha and the apocrypha and Greek literature and blah blah blah, and you're just bringing all this into the Bible that's not actually there. We haven't done anything anywhere else except the Bible tonight, have we? We've only looked at the scripture, and in fact, we've tried to be very careful with what the language actually says. Yeah. And you can get it from the Bible. It's just that, and I think I've got a kind of an outro line for our podcast now. I got the verse that I think explains what I want to do with this, and it's Proverbs 25:2. It is the glory of God to conceal things, but it's the glory of kings to search things out.
Yeah.
Just because something is hidden, it doesn't mean that it's not understandable, that it's not discoverable. It just takes time, and it takes work and effort. And why is it the glory of kings to search things out? Because when you discover these things, it's like, I can't believe that God is letting me see this when so many other people don't see it. It's a marvelous, wonderful feeling that can belong to anybody if they will search God's word.
Absolutely. And the thing is that when you're in the process of seeking out, you know, when you're in the process of researching these things, you're growing, you know, you're growing spiritually. God's word never returns void, even by accident, you know what I mean? Like, when, you know, let alone when you're seeking, you know, when you're digging, when you're looking, you grow. God throws down the gauntlet, it seems, and says, I know something you don't know, but find out. You know?
Yeah, exactly. I've told it to you. Now go see if you can figure it out.
Exactly. It's funny. I started to tease you when you said that you felt that Satan was the prince of Rome, you know. I started to tease you and say, hey, watch it, because that's, you know, what us preachers kind of like dig our heels in to say that the Antichrist comes out of Rome, you know. but what's funny about it is, excuse me, sorry.
We Reformed people, we actually in our confessions say that the Antichrist is the papacy.
Oh yeah. Well, you know, man, I am totally, I completely could see that. You know, we need to do a podcast episode on that whole thing. There's a lot to talk about.
Oh yeah.
No, absolutely. But yeah, what I started to say was, you know, there is in the verse where it talks about the mark of the beast, you know, where, with the exception of the verse that you just quoted, you know, that's one passage where it says, where it almost challenges you, you know, it's a number of man, you know, figure it out, figure out what the number of the beast is, you know. So yeah, God likes to do that. God likes to hold these secrets and challenge you to look into them, to decipher them. You know, there's so much, gosh, there is so much that's hidden, you know, and it's almost like God gets a kick out of it. You know, he leaves these amazing things like what, and again, I don't want to get myself in trouble here because I am not endorsing gematria. I'm not doing that. But what is interesting, and I'm sure you saw it on the film, when you can actually figure out that the number of pi, 3.14, actually has a traceable, using gematria, a traceable origin in the name of God, you know. But my point isn't necessarily to say, oh wow, that's really cool, which I think is cool. But to say God hides, God loves hiding, leaving us all kinds of Easter eggs for us to find. He throws the gauntlet down. So I agree with you 100%. I think, yeah, we've not strayed from, we're not, this is not the episode where we're digging into proving, the benefits of the Book of Enoch or anything like that. But just within the Bible, just purely with scripture, there is just so much to be unearthed and discovered there.
Yeah. And, with something like gematria, I mean, which is a real thing, because the Hebrew and the Greek both have numbers attached to the letters. So it's a thing. And that can get really esoteric. But the stuff we're talking about here, I mean, it's esoteric only in the sense that it's hidden, but it's only hidden because we've forgotten about it and because we're not looking for it. When you're a parent, you have a 2-year-old, you hide Easter eggs different than you do if they're 18-year-old, right?
Exactly.
Does anybody who's 18, do they still do 18-year-old Easter eggs? I suppose. I think we probably did that with an 18-year-old. But you hide a Easter egg for a 2-year-old in absolutely the most plain sight you possibly can.
Right.
I wouldn't. That's not esoteric, right? But it's still hidden to that kid because
absolutely
they don't know where it is, and they're going to look for it. And that's really what we're looking.
Well, and like I said again, like bringing my friend again, but bringing him back up again. He's somebody who knows the Bible. He's somebody who's probably read it all his life and everything. But it's that daring to think outside of the box, and daring to look at the verses that are lesser known, lesser heralded, if you will, and all it takes is looking at something. Myself, man. I mean, I've told you this before. Before I knew the story of the Nephilim, I knew, but I had treated that scripture almost like a speed bump. You
right.
read, you go right over, and you keep going.
Right.
So, but yeah, it's that stopping to look outside the box and looking to see that there is a lot deeper than there is at face value. And the amazing thing is, and obviously our thing is giants and the Nephilim and the Watchers and all that. But the amazing thing is that the Bible is so chock full of these type of things in infinite ways, in other topics and other, topics of the things that we face, the things that we face every day. And the more we dive into the Word, the more revelation He gives us. And He hides the eggs according to our age.
It's funny. One of the interesting things about this topic is that I think a lot of people, they have a tradition that they've inherited, and the tradition, we all inherit tradition. Tradition's not a bad thing, but when tradition is allowed to stop your thinking process, and you just default to tradition, then you've kind of given up the whole idea of sola scriptura, where the Bible is what our authority is. And what's funny is that nothing that we've talked about here tonight wasn't known by Christians in the early church.
Right.
It's just that, other things kind of get in the way for good reasons and bad reasons, and you forget it, and then you just kind of let what you've heard dictate how you think, instead of actually going to the text and letting it tell you what it says.
And unfortunately, that's the road of religion is paved with a lot of that.
A lot of it is, absolutely. So anyway, I hope this was helpful for people, and it's one of my favorite topics, and I know Rudy likes this topic
absolutely
as much as
Thank
I
you
do.
so much.
I hope that it's been helpful for people, and that you can go back and we'll put up verses and stuff so you can look at them on the video. If you're just listening in a car or whatever, you can still get a lot out of it and go back and think through these things, and just get the argument in your head, and it's always there to go and listen to again. So remember, like I said, it's the glory of God to conceal things, but the glory of kings to search them out. And you've been listening to Giant Steps, and I'm Doug Van Dorn. If you like what you've heard tonight, please go and subscribe to our channel. Help us build this thing up. We're brand new into it, and we need to get some sort of traction. We want people to be able to hear the information that we're putting out there, and the interviews that are coming up and all the stuff that we have planned. So do that and like it, and tell your friends about it. Share it wherever you're at on your platforms, and we will talk to you next time.
Absolutely. What do they say, Doug? smash that like and that subscribe button.
Smash that like button.